Okay. Let's review a couple things really quick. Oh, would you like a reading assignment?
Not entirely.
The answer is overwhelming. Did everyone see the quiz? Hmm? Yeah, try to get, I want to do it by 11, yeah. But I'll give you a couple days. It's online, 8 questions. Most people are doing quite well on it. Read's doing quite well. So I'm just trying to, oh! If you notice there's 2 quizzes, I altered it. I'm not sure why it happened, but there were 2. If you did one of them, I'll make sure you got the points. And if there's any problem, just see me. But I think about half of you have done it. So just go to major in the next couple days. We should have 3 quizzes. You have to guess which one's right. Which one will send you back to 3rd grade.
Would I be against going back to 3rd grade?
The little people, they'll get you. They swarm. Have you been around 2nd or 3rd graders? They just, I mean, it's terrifying. I have nothing but respect for elementary school teachers because little kids are terrifying. And the funny thing is, you have elementary school teachers and they say people your age are terrifying. So everyone's terrifying. So moving on. Oh, we're not quite to changing family. We got right to this, laissez-faire economics. Okay, so just to review real quick. What is it called? Where the bigger you are, at least economically, you have a competitive advantage. The iron rule of economics. It dictates everything. The bigger you are. The one I asked you to star, to italicize, to bold. Do you have it?
Economy is a scale.
Economies of scale. And because of that, if you have laissez-faire competition, you don't mess with competition, who is it going to favor?
Big.
Yeah, the big. The big will be favored. And so if anybody says, you know, we don't want regulation, what they're saying is we want the big to dominate. And you might say the big is good because that is more efficient. It also means that just a few people have all the power. In fact, what happened to wealth once you began capitalism? Where did it start going? Yeah, the top. It flows to the top. And so you have to set up rules. In fact, Adam Smith had a rule. He said government, he said the best economic system would be laissez-faire, but since all things are not equal, government must do what? Be what? Anti-what? But what is the term they would give in the US and the weird language they would use in the 1890s? It's not anti-monopoly, it's antitrust. And I'm trying to remember what else. That was a lot of stuff yesterday because capitalism is a big deal. And capitalism is a market economy, but there's 2 clear groups now. Who controls the capital? What are they called? The capitalists and labor, everybody else. And labor is a big change because its wages are now decided by the wage system, which means it's decided by what? What decides wages? The market, supply and demand. If profit goes up, what happens to wages?
Nothing.
Has no direct effect. Has no direct effect. Which is actually a big deal. How do you convince somebody to work harder, knowing the profit won't go to them, it'll go to somebody else? You're right. You give little rewards. You convince them you'll go to heaven if you work hard. Yes. Yeah. Which, by the way, hard work is actually a good feeling when you accomplish something. So it does take advantage of that feeling. I know when you actually do the work, it's easier not to do it. But when you're actually doing it and accomplish something, it feels good, doesn't it? Everyone's got to look at it. You're not setting something up, are you? What do you have planned for? Oh, I got something. All right, so let's get to the new economies. This new world. So before 1815, now, let's be clear about what I mean before 1815. I don't mean for everybody, there were differences. I'm just giving you kind of the generic feeling. Before 1815, families, people, families were producers. They either produced the goods that people bought, or for the most part, they were self-sufficient. They made it for themselves. I'm just making sure all this is broadcasting. I get a little paranoid, which I should. Recording, you can see it, good. They were producers. And so not only does that mean that you made most of the things you needed, which also limited your choices, didn't it? It'd be a pretty sparse, tough, hard existence. So there are elements that people look back and they thought this was great, but a lot of it was incredibly difficult. But most production was done in the home. As this picture shows, home industry. They made the goods, manufactured goods, were either made at home or in people's craftsman shop, which is actually part of the home usually. And so production wasn't in one location. Production was spread out. And what they called it then, production was called, they called it the putting out system. It's also called cottage industry. And you see that called in history all the time as cottage industry. It's industry within the house, within the home. But then it's called putting out, as in a merchant would put out orders to different skilled craftsmen and families to make things like in this picture, shirts, clothing. Which, by the way, they really want to show you in this one how difficult and hard this life would be. Look at the eyes. He's got a scariest. But the whole idea is working incredibly hard. And you'll notice somebody else, or something else about this. Who's important economically for the survival of that family? Who's important? Every single person. And so relative equality economically. And so in this one, I'm guessing, but I think it's a husband and wife, and then all their children. Every single one is important. In fact, do you see the logic for having big families? Little workers. There's a logic to it. You really see it in farms, but you can see it right there too. Most manufacturing is done like that. They would put out these orders. And so that's everything from metalworking, muskets. Families would make the paper cartridges for muskets, for example. That's what they would do. The whole family would work. So that means that the entire idea of how children are raised or what they're for, or even knowing their name, would be different back then. For the vast majority of people, the 99.5%. And families, though, were independent. And work was decided not by the owner or the merchant, but by whoever the skilled craftsman or artisan was. They decided this. And so in this context, you're assuming that this is the skilled craftsman, because it's probably the adult male. But they're independent. They worked as long as they wanted to. And if they didn't want to work that day, they didn't work that day. If they didn't want to take all the orders, they didn't take all the orders. Or if they wanted to work for 5 weeks straight, they did. And then take a month off, they could. They were independent. In fact, you can imagine that the merchants who put out these orders hated that. They wanted control over them. I want this done in a week. And they're like, we'll do it when we're doing it. You got to do it. This is a lot of independence. Remember I told you how males especially resisted going into factories? Because of this system. Even those who hard, backbreaking work, even though they're doing this work, they didn't want to go give up that independence, which is a big deal. And then here's the biggie, pay. How much money you earn was based upon skill. A skilled craftsman could get higher pay. Like I said before, how much work you wanted to put in. If you wanted to work for a week, you did. Want to work all week every day, you did. If you don't want to take a couple orders, you did. It was up to you. And so pay gave this sense of freedom and independence to workers. In fact, in the United States, even some of the most poor individuals, hard, backbreaking work, but they had this sense of liberty that the wage system was a direct attack on. So, what's changing? Don't shake. After 1815. Now, let's be clear about this. When I mean after, it's not like all of a sudden January 1st, 1815, the world changed. We're talking over 100 years. But families went from producers to the gradual change into the 20th century to what we are today, consumers. They went to consumers. Nobody is self-sufficient now. You are reliant upon so many people for your livelihood. So many people, in so many ways you can't even imagine. Everything from getting your food, to the system of school, to someone to provide heat, to the hope that the person who made the brake, installed the brakes in your car wasn't hungover that morning. You're reliant upon so many other people for your livelihood in your life. And so if anybody says, you're going to be independent, it doesn't work that way in the modern economy. And yes, that's both good and bad, isn't it? And one more thing about this, like I said, it's not overnight. This change is coming, and it's going to happen in the Northeast first, and that's spreading. But once it started, by the middle of the 1820s and 1830s, even families that weren't yet affected by it, they could see it coming. It's like literally a steamroller that's coming out. Our whole world is changing. So today it might be this way, the way we're used to it. Tomorrow might be, but we know it's going to be different for me. It's going to be different for my children. A totally different life. And they're not exactly sure how it'll be different. But that's what we call terrifying. That kind of insecurity is going to lead to convulsions in society that will literally change the entire culture. Remember when I told you we couldn't have survived in the Industrial Revolution or before the Industrial Revolution? It's not just because of all the new products, not even just because of the development of capitalism. Their entire way of thinking is going to change. There's nothing that compares to this. In 2,000 years? I guess the closest for Europe would be something like the fall of the Roman Empire. That's the closest I can come up with. We're literally overnight, you went from this incredible civilization to living in ruins and wondering, wow, people were amazing back then. And that's what's happening here. And so, I got to buy this stuff to survive. That means you need money. That changes your entire way. Instead of making it, I have to have money. And so anything that takes away that money could affect your life. And not only consumers that buy like clothing or that kind of thing. I mean, like just your basic necessities of survival. You have to go buy. That means you need a wage. It's a big deal. Speaking of that, it all begins to change. Production goes from the decentralized putting out system to the factory. The factory, where the machines are. The capital became dominant. And so you can sense it. I'm making this at home, but once that factory gets going, I'm pushed out. And everything about my life is different. That's scary. That's really scary. Who's in charge now? No longer going to be independent, skilled craftsmen and families. It's the merchant capitalists. Whoever controls capital, and workers are now dependent. They're dependent upon the person with the capital, but also they're dependent upon a job to survive. They can't survive on their own. That's why economic downturns are going to be so much more difficult and scary and arguably horrific in this time. Because if companies aren't selling products, they lay off their workers, and the workers, what are they going to do? If no one's hiring, what do you do? And the wage system. Pay is now based upon supply and demand. The first labor unions will be against this wage system. We want more control over our lives, and we want a piece of the profit. Of course, that's why companies then hate labor unions, because they get higher wages. And so, new world, brand new world. And so, overall, in the textbook and other things, they'll call this massive convulsions that came out of the Industrial Revolution. They'll call it the very generic market revolution, where you have capitalism, the transportation changes, finance, banking, the accumulation of, or the creation of a system to get the money to buy the capital, all from the Industrial Revolution. It all stems from the Industrial Revolution, but you'll see it called the market revolution. The reason they call it the market revolution, so they can put in the different way of buying and selling goods, the new banking system. They try to tie it all together, but it's all because of the Industrial Revolution. Here is the Panic of 1837. This is a picture of a bank panic. And what happens in a panic, well, I'll talk more about how this directly happens, but people put their savings in a bank. Most of you probably have a savings account in some way. And you probably have a piece of paper, at least a number on a computer screen now, but it says the bank owes you this money. That's what a savings account is. You give the bank money, you're actually loaning the bank money. And they promise to pay you back if you ask. But what happens if the bank runs out of money? They make a bunch of bad loans and people don't pay them back. And all of a sudden you have this piece of paper that's what's it worth? Nothing. And that's why you'll see all these pictures of a bank panic showing sometimes just mounds of paper. I'll show you that. They're all this where they thought they had something that was worth money, this piece of paper, and it's worthless. So you notice a lot of them are holding paper. That's their, you say you owe me. Another term, sometimes you see like stocks and bonds called paper. So at that, so new heading of this, still the Industrial Revolution, but the reactions. Now we got to get to how society changed. And one of the big societal changes was the development of the Temperance Movement to try to convince people to stop drinking. And this is not subtle. Here is the drunkard's progress. So here he is just starting to get a drink. Here he is having a drink with a lady, which would turn out to be probably his wife here. And he goes up to out, having a little argument, a fight, and then a big party where they're drinking. And you know that's supposed to be drunk. And he goes into poverty. It shows him robbing somebody to get more money for alcohol. Then how does it culminate? He commits suicide. And remember I told you about money. If you need wages to survive, and you have the main wage earner drinking it away, what happens to the family? And that would be one of the elements of the temperance movement. Not subtle at all. The idea of a temperance movement would have made no sense before the Industrial Revolution. So, remember I told you people drank 10 times more alcohol before the Industrial Revolution than after. So, one of the first really big shifts are going to be a changing family. So I talked about the producers to consumers. Well, that dramatically shifted in the family, especially for the role of women. That's why I asked you about everybody was economically important. Women became significantly less economically important. As more and more people went out to get a job, men went out to get a job, women lost economic power in almost every family. And yes, women did resist this. This was seen as unfair. It was more of a general discontent with the system because it was hard. It was so new, it was hard to put a finger on. But women lost power. And men dramatically gained power. Men went off to work, and their whole entire survival of the family depended upon that man. That's a huge amount of power. And I mean, women, not only did they lose economic power, but they became even more dependent upon men. They needed that man to survive. And so this is a big shift. Yes, women did not have many legal or political rights before this, but they're going to lose them all because of this. And so, how did they come up with what system did they come up with? Click. The cult of domesticity. The cult of domesticity. And it's called a cult with the implication that this has almost a religious connotation. Click. Sorry. So, the cult of domesticity. And it pushed this concept is that the role of women must be one of the so-called middle class values, where women are no longer going to be slaving away working, but they're going to be home. In fact, the home will be called the women's sphere. Home, domestic abode. And before you get down to morality and values, then what became the job of a woman? Get married. And be subservient to the husband. And how do you do that? By keeping a clean house and having everything ready for it and being a support for the husband. That became the role of women. Now, there was an element of this before, but they really pushed this idea is that you shouldn't resist. Now you have a chance to be what you're supposed to be. At home, cleaning and having children. And then what about the children? It is the job of the woman to teach the moral, so teach morality and values to children. In fact, that would be the sphere is like their area of control in the home. Women's job, morality, values, teaching the children. What is the husband's job? To go off into this economic and political world and do all those manly stuff. And women stay at home and do those duties. And so therefore, women don't have to worry about things like politics or economics or jobs. You don't have to worry about it. Don't worry your pretty little heads. Just worry about having children. By the way, I meant to be very condescending. Did it work? Was I condescending enough? Pretty good? Pretty good?
I'll say 7 out of 10.
7 out of 10?
Yeah.
I gotta work on that. And here's the thing. I didn't write this down, but make sure you write this down. And they twist this idea that this was natural. It's always been this way. When it wasn't this way, women were incredibly important, necessary for survival as men. And now they're saying you're not necessary. And it says one more thing too. What if that's the only job for women? What if women want to do something else? What are they? What's that? Yeah, don't do it. And if you want to do it, there's something wrong.
You're rich.
The witch part is kind of going away, but it has the same element. Yeah. There's something wrong with you if you want to do that. Your only avenue should be to get married. And if you're not married as a woman, you're a witch. Let's go. And this shows it pretty well, doesn't it? This is a good painting. It says, home sweet home. And you don't even if I didn't tell you anything else, who's in charge of that household? The king. No. Yeah. Without a doubt, right? Look how adoringly they all look at him. There she is sewing. She's keeping a nice family. Got a bird, cat, mouse. Okay, so, and that's the role of women. And they began to teach young women, this is what you're supposed to be. And who did the teaching? I just told you. Their mothers. Right? Who teaches women they're supposed to be this?
So let's say hypothetically, mothers should stop teaching their children that they need to be complicit. Would that turn it around, or would there be a huge backlash from men?
Oh, it would be a huge backlash, but that's one of the big elements of the women's rights movement. In fact, the biggest element is women should have more options than just simply one. And there's certainly nothing wrong if somebody wants to stay home, but that should not be the only option that women should have, while men have innumerable options, at least at that time. But you're right, the whole thing would break down. But if you're taught from day one that you're supposed to be subservient from your mom, what are you going to believe? And that's why sexism kind of has the same, it works a little bit like racism. If you're taught from day one this is supposed to be, you soon just, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. And this was a creation of the Industrial Revolution, and that's why the cult is so important. But this fit in with the idea of something called Republican womanhood. And Republican womanhood was women should teach young men to be good citizens. Doesn't it have kind of the same vibe? And this was a thing for people like John Adams to say to Abigail Adams, his wife, don't worry about not being free. You're still important. You teach your sons to be good citizens. See? We're all in this together. So Republican womanhood has a very much tie into the cult of domesticity. And don't forget, this is all from the Industrial Revolution, and it is incredibly pervasive to this day. And if you don't believe me, just watch a little bit of TV shows, especially like daytime television shows. You guys gonna be home for a day. But if they ever show an ad of somebody like with laundry detergent or something, who's doing the work for the most part? Who's doing that stuff? And if it's a man ever doing it, it's like the guy's like doing something stupid, so then the woman could come in, this is how you do the work that women are supposed to do. And it's very, yeah, that's kind of subtle, but it's not really. And so during the Industrial Revolution, women lost legal rights, lost political rights. There were some states in the North that women had the right to vote, women with property, just like men did. They lost that. Every state lost that. The last one being Connecticut. And also legal rights. Women became more and more bound to their husband and lost all legal rights. In fact, in most states, it was not until the 1970s that women could get something like a checking account. She could only get one through her husband or her father. In 1970s might seem like a long time ago. In a way, it kind of is. But if it's in the lifetime of somebody in the room you're sitting in, it's really not that long ago. So, in fact, I can remember when they changed to Montana. Heck, I can remember a teacher that I had. She was my second grade teacher, and when I was in third grade, she was married and she got pregnant, and they asked her to leave, and she was fired. And that was the norm. And once again, not that long ago, 1924. So at that, try to get my years right. Maybe a little after 24. But this is a big deal. Oh, one more thing, I didn't put this down. Almost immediately what happened was women started getting married a lot younger. Before, getting married was a big economic issue. You have to get married, you got to work together. Women might not get married to the late 20s, late 30s. They got married a lot later in colonial America and that era in Europe. All of a sudden, women started getting married in their mid-teens.
What?
Sure.
So you're telling me I could have been married?
Oh, yeah. And yeah, that's creepy and horrific in so many ways, especially when the guy's like 35 or something, right? But don't forget, there was a different societal norms back then. But it's still, but it also tells you what are women. Yeah. Same thing happened in the 1950s. During the Great Depression and World War II, women got married a lot later. Families got, but as soon as that, everybody wanted to get back to normal in the 1950s. What was normal? The cult of domesticity. And also, it became the norm for young women to get married right out of high school. Right out. And then become housewives. Just right out. And the marriage age started going up again as women started getting rights. Speaking of that, what about the children's? What about children's? Before the Industrial Revolution, they're good little workers, aren't they? After the Industrial Revolution, children become expensive and a drain on a wage. I know that's a horrible way to look at it, but you are expensive. You require things like food, clothing, shelter. That's expensive. The more children you have, the bigger bite out of the wages. There's always been talk about there's always been a big issue about, it's called family planning, but when families have children. But with the Industrial Revolution, it became a priority. Too many children, family can't survive. But then also, if you have a child, if they're that expensive, don't your attitudes towards them change? Before they're workers, I need them. Now they became something, wow, I'm making a choice to have a child. I might grow to like them and know their names.
They not know their kids' names?
I'm being a little facetious, but the attitude was different. You know, of course, children died younger, but they're workers. There's a different attitude if the children goes from a worker to something I made the decision to have, so I better love this choice a lot. And so, first off, let me show you this is the sphere of women. All right? Isn't that nice? Reading, puppy. We're jumping right to this thing. Huh, what's that? If you have children, don't you want to be nice to them and get them stuff? The secular holiday of Christmas, that it's known throughout the world, came out of the Industrial Revolution. These cartoons by Thomas Nast, that is where our vision of Santa Claus came. And when did that come? At the beginning of the Civil War. Christmas before the Industrial Revolution, Christmas among Christians was a very unimportant holiday. You know, they didn't know the date. They just piggybacked on a Roman holiday called Saturnalia. It's the summer solstice or the winter. Not the winter. What's the shortest day of the year called? My mind froze. The winter solstice. The shortest day of the year. And it's like Saturnalia was like, wait a minute, it's the winter. Summer might come again. And the early Christians weren't dumb. They piggybacked on that holiday because what's the holiday that matters to Christians? Easter. It's not Christmas, it's Easter. So Christmas was a very secular, meaning non-religious holiday for most people. In fact, it was a big drunk. It was a 7-day drunk. Remember I told you about the Battle of Trenton? And the Germans were drunk? In fact, the first police force, the Metropolitan Police Force in what's Manhattan, which is going to become New York City, was partially to stop Christmas. Because it was just out of control, breaking and looting. But now you have a situation where you have two things. First off, you have families who want to be nice to their children. Makes sense, right? And you have capitalists who are making goods and want people to buy them. Do you catch that? Doesn't that come together for a totally different kind of holiday? Where one time a year people go spend money to be nice to their children, but also provides demand. And that's what the secular holiday of Christmas came about.
So when did Christmas become a thing where you just get gifts for everyone?
Right here. And then you can imagine what companies did. You keep selling, you should buy gifts for other people, because that's demand. You buy stuff. Well, it's not necessarily bad. It's nice to be, it feels good to be nice to other people. And, but the other thing is, think about me, Kit Kats. Kit Kats now this time of year. But this would come about here. And so you go to places like China where the vast majority of the population are not Christian, not virtually everybody, and Santa Claus is everywhere. That gives you an idea how the Industrial Revolution can change everything. And then you have other holidays. I mean, where do you think Mother's Day and Father's Day came from? So greeting cards. That's where they come from. It's not a bad thing. I like my mom and dad a lot.
Did you have like Valentine's Day too?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So cards, sure. Once again, it's not necessarily bad, but think how pervasive the Industrial Revolution was. And so Santa Claus, that came about. That was Thomas Nast drawn. That was not what Santa Claus, that's not what St. Nick looked like. But it does in Thomas Nast's mind. You ever heard A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens? He made that whole story up out of his head. There was no tradition like that. He kind of made it up. And now people think, oh, that's the traditional Christmas. It was the traditional Christmas of Charles Dickens sitting in a tavern in Bath, England. Tavern is where he's eating. And have you ever seen this? Xmas? Anybody know what that means? Hmm? That is Christ. That's Greek. Christos. That's all. It's just Christmas. That's all it means is Christmas. X is Greek. That's Greek letter, and how you pronounce that is. But we say it's an X, it's Christos. And that's the way Christianity was spread through Greek. 20 to 50 CE, the Common Era. Yeah. And so that's all it means. That's all it means. It's just X means Christos. So it was never, it's just another way of saying Christmas. Only reason I mention that is I'm going to talk about this today in Western State. We're talking about actually Christianity and Roman Empire becoming Christian. And that's where that comes from. It's actually Christos, and they have the Moss because stupid English speakers didn't know that meant Christos. That's all it meant. And so people get a lot of different things about that. And I do laugh when people say we want to go back to the old Christmas and the traditional Christmas. And I'm thinking, no, you don't. Do you really want a 12-day drunk?
Yes.
Okay, maybe they do. I don't know. By the way, yes, and someone walks in, that would look bad. We filmed that, didn't we? So, with that, out of this came the women's rights movement. And it's one of those weird situations where women lost rights. Maybe, it's the realization of it, when they lost rights, would lead to the fight that would try to get equal rights. And these were mostly middle-class women. Middle-class women were the first women who were staying at home. They're the first one to do this cult of domesticity as their husbands went off to work. And if they're responsible for the morality of the family, many women started thinking, well, what about society? Shouldn't we get involved in the morality of society, especially women who are thinking, who wanted to be more involved. But remember, they're being taught. And this happened right away. It happened so fast, it's kind of hard to even imagine. You must stay at home. And so with that, they became involved in these so-called reform movements of the Industrial Revolution. Abolitionists, which was to get rid of slavery, temperance, to ban drinking. They got prison reform. They called it insane asylum reform. They started pushing for more rights for people. And you can imagine what's going to happen. Wait a second. More rights for men? What about us? And that's the beginning of the first real modern women's rights movement. Industrial Revolution, women lost rights, called to domesticity, led to, I should add, one of the biggest attack on the women's rights movement. You're going against the traditional role of women to be good housewives. And this attack will be, they're going to divorce their husbands, and we'll go on and on, quit having children. By the 1970s, it was, we'll get to it. And so, basically saying we need more equal legal, political, and economic rights. But the thing about it is these first women looking at this realized you're never going to get economic rights or legal rights until you change who writes the rules. So the most important thing was political rights, AKA, and you have it right there, voting. And that's where you get the suffragettes. Suffrage was a term for voting, and this weird, awkward thing that has, for the most part, gone away, adding "et" to anything that's female. So women who want to vote became suffragettes. Voting, the right to vote. They focused on that. We get the right to vote. We put in people who would change the rules. Because you can't have economic or legal rights until the rules are changed. And so the three women we need to know, Lucretia Mott would be one of the first leaders, married, middle class, incredibly intelligent, a brilliant person. And she befriended, and turned out to be a very powerful friendship, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, another smart person there, she's with her daughter. But Stanton, unlike Mott, to sell a movement, you have to have a lot of charisma. And Stanton was a little bit more comfortable giving speeches, because that's hard work. That's hard to do. And so those worked great together, and then joining them now as a much younger woman, and she'd be active for the rest of the century, Susan B. Anthony. In fact, the voting rights of, or the amendment that said women cannot be denied the right to vote, the 19th Amendment, is the Susan B. Anthony Amendment. And at first, they were also very much involved in the abolitionist movement, but then that would divide over race, like so many things in this country. But those are the three of the most important leaders, and all of them are going to be accused of destroying the family and hating men. Which, two of them were very happily married. Susan B. Anthony had some pretty bad experiences with men, so I think she was justified in hating a lot of men. That's another story. But it's those three. And we're leading to the first ever women's rights convention, beating Britain. Okay, we'll finish this tomorrow. I'll do this online. The suffragette movement actually started in Britain. The Industrial Revolution started there. But the U.S. had the first women's rights convention. It's like the Declaration of Independence. I'm kind of proud of those things. All right. Oh, did I give you your reading? I totally forgot to give you a reading assignment. I teased it out and never said it, didn't I? I'm sorry. 402 to 419. So you have to finish chapter 9. We started it, but basically the election of 1824 through Jackson. 402 to 419. For Thursday. I put it on Teams. I post every day what we do. I put it up there. By the way, if you're not sure, I post it every day. What we do. I'll see you tomorrow. I like the shoes. No Chuck Taylors. We got Chuck Taylors there too. Don't play basketball in them. I have to. Yeah. Get the class. You're fine. I didn't mean to grab this mask. It's just a little small.
Too stretchy.
Yeah, so it's kind of pulling your ears, you know.
I can't wait for everyone to take off the masks and we all look like one of those people that have like ears like all this.
I can think of it now, but I know what you mean.